This is part 2. So if you did not watch part 1 yet, please go back and watch part 1 of the video. This is just the last couple of minutes that I couldn't fit in to the first video. So continuing with our emotional fallacies, slippery slope is one that I know you guys have heard of before. Slippery slope says essentially that if one thing is allowed, it will be the first step in a series of bad things that will happen. Slippery slope is almost always bad, downward spiral. These do not take into consideration all of the facts. An example, if public libraries block their computers' access to websites with pornography, it will lead to government censorship. Is that necessarily true? I don't know, but it's definitely, there's a leap in logic there as well. And it's definitely promoting a sense of fear within the, the people who are listening, the audience. So slippery slope, if one thing happens, then terrible catastrophic things are going to happen as a result. Not necessarily. And so you can't make that leap. All right, ethical fallacies. Again, these fallacies take into consideration what's right and wrong, and sometimes ignore those. Ad hominem is one of my favorite fallacies because unfortunately, President Trump uses these quite often. A lot of politicians use them as well. This is a fallacy that you guys sometimes will use very casually when you're discussing anything or having casual arguments with your friends. Ad hominem is when all of a sudden you attack the person rather than the actual issue. So if you're having a discussion with someone about, the effects of climate change and one person's made their argument and then all of a sudden you go, God, you're such a hippie. You're attacking the person. You're not necessarily attacking the argument, which is what you should be doing when you're using strong rhetoric and making good, solid arguments. Never attack the person. Another example, he won't be a good mayor because he drank too much when he was in college. Well, who didn't, first of all? And second of all, his drinking 20 years ago had nothing to do with the quality of his of being a mayor. Those two things are not related. You're attacking the person. You're not attacking the actual issue. When we make arguments, they should be strong and logical and based on the facts at hand, not the person who's making them. Faulty use of authority. This is a great one because it's used all the time in commercials and advertising, and it is exactly what it sounds like. When you use a person of authority, an expert, to back up what you're saying, but that expert isn't actually an expert in the area that you're trying to argue, that's a fallacy. Just because a person is an expert in one area does not mean he's an expert in all areas. A lot of commercials, for example, lots of actors and actresses will endorse makeup or shampoo or lotions, like a lot of different cosmetic products. They're actors. Their expertise is in acting, not dermatology or any other medical field. So that doesn't really work. Justin Bieber used to do, like 5 years ago, he used to do Proactive. He's a singer, and what other kind of celebrity the kid is, but he's definitely not a dermatologist who studies facial abnormalities, acne, whatever. No. So another example, dermatologist Henry Jones praises the benefits of SuperCal as preventative for osteoporosis. Well, osteoporosis is a study of the bones, and someone who studies skin, probably not. So faulty use of authority is used quite often, and we usually fall for it. So make sure that when you're writing, you don't use this fallacy in your own writing. If you're trying to make a really strong argument in writing, make sure that when you provide evidence as part of your CEA chunks, that the writer of the evidence is legit, that they're actually an expert in the field that you're discussing. Guilty by association is something my mom did all the time when I was your age. Just because Johnny's irresponsible does not necessarily mean you are if you were hanging out with him. So associating people together and then saying that, Johnny's just as bad as Billy because he's with them. They're not guilty just because they're with each other. That's an ethical fallacy. Appeal to tradition is very common in saying that just because things have always been done this way, they should continue to be done this way. That's not logical. Things should continue to go that way if there's data and facts and science that proves that it's working. You can't just say we should keep teaching kids by lecturing because that's how we've done it since the beginning of time. That's a fallacy. If lecturing proves scientifically that students remember the content more, that students are more successful in life, fine. But just saying that we should do something because it's always been done that way is illogical. Men should pay for dates just because they always have. The reverse of this fallacy, the opposite, is called appeal to novelty. And it's the complete opposite. Things are bad with party A in charge, so party B will be better just because it's new. Just because something is new doesn't mean that it's right. A couple of years ago in the educational field, we started doing this thing called flipped classrooms. It was new, it was fancy, it sparkled, and people all over the country, teachers, counties, adopted this method of teaching. And they were so excited because it was new. It didn't work. It lasted for like a year. Just because it's new does not necessarily make it good. 2 more. Moral equivalence, suggesting that things are the same morally when in fact they do differ. And so arguing something like Nixon. Nixon made some mistakes. He committed a bunch of crimes, and comparing him and his crimes to like Clinton, came up again, Clinton having inappropriate relationship with an aide. That's bad, but what Nixon did was worse, so you can't equate the two. You can't, as the title suggests, say that they're equals morally when they're very different. In fact, they're both wrong, but you can't equate them morally. And dogmatism is very similar to the either-or fallacy, false dilemma. Dogmatism means that there's only one possible solution or one possible approach, one option. There's never just one option. And just like the other fallacy, false dilemma, says that there's 2 options, there's never just 2 options either. This one's really easy to spot because oftentimes speakers will use the word obviously or clearly. It's never obvious, and there's never just one solution or one item to be looking at. An example of this, there's no way anyone can argue that abortion is anything but murder. You might feel strongly that that might be your opinion, but there's a lot of ways people can argue that abortion is anything but murder. So saying that there's just one solution or one way of looking at something is a dogmatism fallacy. It is illogical, and it's not how we want to make good arguments. So again, I mentioned this before in part 1. Do you need to memorize these? No. You can if you want. You can memorize a few from each category if that helps you. But ultimately, what's going to happen this year in this class is that you will not use fallacies in your own writing or in your verbal argumentation. When we did the would you rather exercise last week, I heard fallacies right and left. And that's okay, because it takes a lot of practice to stop using them, because we hear fallacies everywhere, on TV, in any kind of media, in just conversation with people. I use them sometimes. So it's really hard to be aware and to break that habit. And so that's why I wanted to talk you guys through all the different kinds of fallacies today, so that you're aware of how many different ways arguments could go awry and become illogical. So we don't want to use them in our own writing. The other reason why we're doing this today is because you guys are about to go out into the real world in a few years. And our world is a train wreck. And if I can help teach you some critical thinking, fallacies, you can spot all the issues in arguments from our politicians, from different leaders, from media. I mean, good heavens, we don't even know what kind of news sources anymore are reliable, because there's fallacies happening in all of them. And so we need to be able to identify those fallacies so that we can think critically and make good decisions about our belief system, about our values, and when we go and vote and make other sorts of decisions that affect other people. And so fallacies are really important in this course when we're studying all about rhetoric. So what I need for you guys to do is to come to class tomorrow with questions about fallacies. And then tomorrow and for a couple days this week, we're going to practice identifying fallacies in commercials and in written pieces so that you can get more practice reading something or seeing something and being like, oh, that's not logical, that's definitely a fallacy. And then which fallacy is it? Because it could be helpful sometimes if you're able to identify, is it logical, ethical, or emotional? How is the author or the speaker trying to trick you? So that's it, okay? Make sure that you watch parts 1 and 2 of this video. Come to class tomorrow with questions, and we're gonna keep working on fallacies, and hopefully we will not use them, and we'll be able to see through the BS that is our world full of them. Thank you guys, see you tomorrow.